Oh, hello. Merry Christmas. The bells will start in a minute. Just hang on. Hang tight. Ho, ho, ho. Hello, marketer. How are you? It's that time of the year again for our top 10 moments of 2022. My name's Mark Ritson, and for the last 13 years, I've been doing this lame ass poll at the end of each year where I look at kind of the stuff that's happened in marketing and what are the biggest stories, but also what are the ones that have the bigger implications for marketing as well. And I'm going to run you through the top 10. One incident at a time, from 10 down to 1. My main message before we start is just how scientific my approach is. I use test tubes and microscopes and all kinds of stuff. So this is literally exactly scientifically correct, and I don't want you to even worry about anything, okay? So let's get going with our top 10 marketing moments of the year. First of all, let's just enjoy that music again. We spent our whole marketing budget on it for 2022, so we should probably enjoy it. But enough. So here we go. Number 10. You ready? Musk messes up with pricing. So I have many feelings about Elon Musk. And I would encourage you to have many feelings about him too. They range from thinking he's a moron, maybe a sociopath, right across to he's a genius, has a wonderful sense of humor, and I think he's on a mission to do some amazing things. And I would encourage you, unlike most marketers, to have that same variance of thought. And I suspect if he was here, and he's not, he would say the same thing. At the moment, we have the sort of left-wing orthodoxy that's trying to portray him as a right-wing nutter. That's simply not true. Whatever else you think of Musk, he is apolitical. Yeah, he's driven by certain things and he doesn't give a fuck, but he's not a political animal. And I think we should remember that. And we have this very odd position at the moment where brands are pulling out of advertising on Twitter because, Elon Musk, something, but are still totally comfortable with the World Cup sponsorship, and that's fine. Even though there are a legion of reasons, as we'll see in this top 10, why that's a much more ropey affair. So I'm not trying to be supportive of Musk. I'm trying to point out that at the moment there's an attempt on the left to portray him in a certain way. And I believe there's as much propaganda on the left as there is on the right. And I think Musk is a beautiful example of that. Now, having built him up a little bit perhaps, let's now pull him down on what was easily his most pathetic moment of 2022. So Elon illustrates for us, I think, the perfect exemplar of how not to do pricing. It's almost like that episode of Seinfeld where, you just do the exact George Costanza does the exact opposite of what he normally would do, and he's wildly successful in everything. In the same way, if you wanted a crash course in pricing, you should probably focus on doing the inverse of what we're about to see Musk doing here. So what do I mean by that? Well, first of all, a key point that's missed by many. Price, £2.46, is very different from pricing, the process we go through to arrive and communicate that £2.42 price. Yep, let's remember that, because that's what we're talking about here. Not Twitter having the wrong price, but the way they went about it was wrong. So you may recall a few months ago, Musk announced that to achieve and to be rewarded with the famous blue tick of certification, you would now have to pay $20 per month. And this went down incredibly badly with lots of people, but especially those that had the blue tick of certification and were now facing a sudden arbitrary introduction of a $20 fee per month to pay for it. And just note, first of all, right, so Musk was in the business, I think, for about a week when he announced the $20 monthly fee. And that illustrates a key point. There's no way he had any research at that point, after being there for a week. He just went straight to, I'm going to change the price. Remember that before we get to tactics, we need decent research. And also note that once you've done your research, you still need to have a clear strategic view of what and who and when you're going to do things, I would argue a week is in no way, shape, or form enough time to have put together a decent strategy, of which price is then a tactical execution of it. And the evidence of that was pretty clear, because when Musk announced his $20 a month fee, he elicited anger against most of the people, most of his user base, that he really didn't want to piss off at all. Most notably Stephen King, who, on discovering he was going to be charged $20 a month, issued a fantastic tweet. And I quote, $20 a month to keep my blue check? Fuck that. They should pay me. If that gets instituted, I'm gone like Enron. Thank you, Stephen King. And so King illustrates the point here that as a customer, he's like, hey, I was getting this thing for free, and now for no apparent reason at all, I have to pay $20 a month. And by the way, you should be paying me here because I'm providing you with content for free. Now, Musk's response, we know Musk likes to get involved, was within a few hours. Hey, says Musk, we need to pay the bills somehow. Twitter cannot rely entirely on advertisers. How about $8, right? Now, in this short, pithy, 3-sentence tweet, we again have a legion of pricing errors, yeah? First of all, you're showing here that there's room for movement. There's blood in the water up here, yeah? So within a sentence, with one pushback from a notable author, Musk's like, okay, $20 doesn't work. How about $8? The first point about price changes is they must come with total certainty. No room to maneuver, no chance for anyone to suggest we might want to start a negotiation. And crucially here, we've ignored, for me, the most important part of pricing, the concept of framing, anchoring, communicating a price. I've worked on pricing a number of times in my career. It's not my specialist area, but I've been involved with it. And I can tell you my biggest insight, repeatedly, is that if you look at the process of pricing, it's clear that the most important part is how we contextualize, frame, communicate the price, which is arbitrarily located in the mind of the consumer in such a way that they perceive it to be good value. And despite what economists might tell you, it really isn't about the price itself as much as it's about the way that we frame it. I think that's a crucial point, and it explains why we need marketers involved in pricing, yeah? That the way we present it, not like Musk has done it here, must be carefully arranged in order to make sure a price is framed properly. I'm not a big fan of behavioral economics. I mean, I am. It's entertaining. It's counterintuitive. It makes for a good presentation. But for the most part, I find it to be hand trickery, yeah? Relatively superficial hand trickery. But the one exception to that is understanding how behavioral economics has revolutionized pricing and specifically price framing. And I think here we see a perfect example, again, of how not to do it. And finally, look at his justification there, you know? Hey, we need to pay the bills somehow, right? This is the exact wrong point again. And I'm sorry to keep going on it, but it's true, right? Remember that pricing is about value. There are business schools that would argue that marketing is about value. And that's a very handy concept because value comes to us with a V. In most languages, not all, but most languages, value begins with a V. And that's very useful because it reminds you of something. It reminds you there are two prongs, this prong and this prong. And this prong is very much located in the organization, in the stakeholders, in the company. One goal of pricing is clearly to generate value for the organization and its stakeholders. Absolutely right. And clearly Musk gets that point. But the other V, the other prong of the V, points into the world of the customer. There has to be value for the customer. And I would argue that bit comes first. That the way we generate value for organizations is generating value for customers. And that mutually beneficial V is at the heart of good pricing. You cannot sell in a price increase on the basis that, hey, we need to increase prices because we have to pay our bills. That's one prong pricing. I just made that up, but you know what I mean. So for number 10, we start with Musk because pricing is, I believe, one of the more important tactical levers. And we've lost it in marketing. We've become a coloring in department, the comms department. Remember, advertising is about 8% of marketing. But for many marketers and companies, it's 100%. And that means we miss out on price. Now, remember, I get someone probably on a weekly basis that will email me and say, hey, look, you talk about pricing. That's unrealistic. Marketers aren't in charge of pricing. No, they're not. And they never really were. But in good organizations and in better times when we had better marketers, we were part of it. We didn't own it, but we had a seat at the pricing table. And I believe as we go into 2023, and we'll talk about this later on in the top 10, the pricing P is the most important one for the year ahead. And remember, when we talk about that pricing process, we're really talking about 3 stages. We're talking about doing the research and the thinking that goes into pricing. Then there is the price itself that comes out, or the new price that comes out of the process. And then don't forget, there is the framing or communication of the price, or it's changing to the marketplace. My point to you is, yes, marketers are not in charge of price, but 2 of those 3 steps are fundamentally part of the marketing process. We can add enormous value there. Yeah? If companies are setting price using research just from costs and competitors, and they're not getting it from customers, I'd argue they're A, going to underprice, and B, they're going to get it wrong. Again, I don't want marketers in charge of pricing. I think that would be chaotic. But I think we can add a lot to the table. And I think 2023 is the year when we can deliver that value for the benefit of the company, but also for the benefit of the marketer too. Okay, here we go. Brands mourn the death of our beloved Queen. As you may have noticed, Queen Elizabeth II passed away this year. It was a very sad story after a wonderful reign. What was interesting was the response of the brands to that situation. So here's just a lovely emotional tweet. It is with great sadness that we acknowledge Her Majesty the Queen's passing. For 70 years, she stewarded us through our darkest and brightest days. Thank you, Your Majesty, R.I.P. And that really emotional tweet came from the British Kebab Awards. Beautiful, yeah? And obviously the British Kebab Awards thought that their customers deeply cared about their position on the death of the monarch, and they produced this ridiculous tweet. And they weren't alone. There were hundreds of brands making an ass of themselves on social media. Playmobil thought it fitting to create a Queen Elizabeth doll, but just to keep it tasteful, do it in black and white. Shrek World, some kind of god-awful tourist attraction in London, felt that it needed to, again, feel the country's pain and share everyone's deep sadness. Thank you, Shrek World or Shrek Adventure. We can't forget, I've got to take my glasses off to get the full glory of this one, Jimmy's Dildo Emporium. I want to read this one out. Everyone associated with Jimmy's Dildo Emporium is saddened with the news that HM Queen Elizabeth II has passed. And as a mark of respect, we will not tweet from this account for the next few days. You see what's happening there? Jimmy's Dildo Emporium, as a mark of respect to the Queen, will not use their social media presence and will have to live without their tweets because it's what Her Majesty would have wanted. And there was more, believe it or not, there was more tasteless messages than that. I can't even bring myself to read it, right? Safe travels, Mom, from Thomas Cook, right? It's just appalling, right? Now, is this damaging to the brands? No. Does anyone complain? No. But it's symptomatic of I think a bigger problem for many brands. Okay, let's start with 2 observations. First of all, consumers don't fucking care what your brand thinks about the death of the monarch. They don't care what you think about coronavirus or the election or anything else. Okay, they really don't care. Okay, and they don't care because, cue title, brands are little things, okay? Almost, not quite, but almost meaningless in the life of a consumer, yeah? The only people that overstate the importance and meaningfulness of brands are marketers. who spend 8 hours a day fixated on making their brand important, focusing on their brand, associating their brand with key things, and at some point they go native, lose the whole context of things, and forget that brands are little things. It is super important you don't make that error, okay? Your brand, even if the consumer buys it and likes it, is a little thing. Because once you grasp that reality, a number of things become more clear, okay? The first thing is salience, we'll talk about that one later as well, becomes far more important because you suddenly realize not only is my brand not important to the customer, she doesn't think about it a hell of a lot of time. Ergo, I should improve that by driving salience. You don't think that way if you think people know about your brand. And I believe that missed idea is a failure of market orientation, a failure to see the world from the point of view that the customer has. We're looking at it from our building going, our brand is the center of everything. We've missed that 180 that comes from market orientation, where if we truly see it from the customer's point of view, they never think about us at all, often even in buying situations. We've forgotten that. Probably the greatest advertising planner in the UK right now is Adam and Eve Sarah Carter, right? She's brilliant, right? And she said many brilliant things, but nothing more brilliant than this, right? She said every person who works in advertising should have a post-it note above their desk that says, consumers don't give a shit. People's indifference to brands and advertising should be the starting point. Yeah, she's right. Yeah, indifference, a lack of care is absolutely the issue. And it's not just salience that we realize once we understand how small and unimportant our brands are. This nonsense about brand purpose also begins to diminish when we realize that taking a point of view on things is not wrong or right, it's just irrelevant to many customers and many brands. A focus on simplicity and tightness and not trying to over-communicate or over-position brands starts to emerge because we understand how small the eye of the needle really is. And I believe fundamentally in this. I'm not saying your brand is a little thing to piss you off. I mean, I am slightly, but I'm mostly saying it because it's good for you. If you know your brand is a little thing, if you step back from the madness of thinking anyone cares what your brand thinks about the death of the Queen, you'll start to manage your brand better. Because from that smaller, realistic place comes better brand management. So I think, the death of the Queen illustrates a bigger problem. Brands are overstepping their role, and as a result, doing stupid things. Let's talk about BrewDog, and let's talk about BrewDog's anti-sponsorship of the World Cup. So you may or may not know BrewDog. They're a really rather remarkable Scottish brand that has become a very successful, relatively large, independent brewery. And many years ago, they took that idea of quite strong pale ales and other beers and independence, and it began to migrate into their tone of voice and the way they positioned their brand with great success. In the last few weeks, we've seen them embark upon quite a critical campaign aimed at the World Cup, which, as you may have heard, is being held in Qatar. And that makes not just no sense, but it makes inverse sense. On pretty much every cause-related issue you can list, it's stupid, yeah? Let's not go into that again. We're all aware of that issue. The point is BrewDog saw it as an opportunity. And the opportunity came from announcing themselves as the anti-sponsor of the World Cup. They brewed a special beer called Lost, and will potentially give the profits from that beer to various charities. But the main thing is, with a really rather exceptionally well done outdoor campaign, which was amplified through social and media, they've become the anti-sponsor of the World Cup. And as usual, because it's BrewDog, they haven't held back. They've really gone after it with some, pretty brutal, pretty impressive, clutter-breaking comms. Particularly like this one, The Beautiful Shame. And the stuff has, as you, I'm sure, have discovered, particularly if you live in the UK, it's generated a lot of headlines. So, first of all, let's be clear, Brewdog are making a worthy point. Yeah, they're right, and companies that have gone to Qatar and sponsored the games are wrong, right? In the sense that they shouldn't be there. From an environmental, from a social point of view, from a labor point of view and a union point of view, from a bribery point of view, from an LGBTQ point of view, the whole thing's wrong, right? So they're making a good point. But the marketing community has an axe to grind with Brewdog, yeah? And they've drawn attention on social media and in general media a couple of little problems with Brewdog's campaign. First of all, even though they're the anti-sponsor of the World Cup games will be shown in Brewdog pubs, which doesn't sound like anti-sponsorship. Second, Brewdog is exporting their beer to Qatar and selling beer in the Qatari nation. It will also be served at various venues in the country during the World Cup. Again, doesn't sound like anti-sponsorship. And finally, as you may have read last year, Brewdog has had its own employee issues. Now, they're not killing their brewers in the thousands, but they have had a series of serious incidents which have forced the CEO of the company to make an apology, and it hasn't been done perfectly. So that's led to, of course, both marketers generally on social media and also in the media itself, this concept that Brewdog's anti-sponsorship will come back to bite them on the ass. The Punk Craft Brewery faces new backlash from its campaign. Brewdog slammed for disingenuousness, yeah? And in hospitality, Brewdog accused of hypocrisy, yeah? So the tenor of all this is this campaign will bite them on the ass because they're not actually walking the walk, they're just talking the talk, yeah? And by the way, that's an allegation you could apply to other brands who are currently in Qatar, as we said, and shouldn't be in Qatar, etc., etc. There's lots of this going around saying, oh yeah, you're very keen on gay and lesbian and trans rights, until, of course, the FIFA World Cup goes to a country where all of that is not just opposed, but is illegal, and you still go and support those games. You guys will get, you'll get hit by this. Consumers won't stand for it. Well, it turns out that's completely wrong. And I think it's important we say that that's not going to happen, yeah? That's not how marketing works. It may be how it should work, but that's not the point. It's not going to work that way. One of the greatest books in the history of brand management is David Arker's Managing Brand Equity. And it really did set the tone for the next 30 years of brand management. It's a giant publication, yeah? But it's more than 30 years ago since it came out, yeah? That's a very, very long time in any discipline, but especially in marketing, yeah? And we have to acknowledge that the Dark Lord of Penetration and his institute and his focus moving away from brand awareness and then lots of brand image towards essentially a more salient point of view where bringing the brand to mind is the main objective is the modern accepted approach to brand management. And Arker's brilliance 30 years ago was also an overstatement of the power of brand image and an understatement of the power of brand awareness. Why do I say that? Well, again, brands are little things, yeah? I think we overstated in the 90s how big they were, how people were having relationships and lots of anthropomorphic things with them. I think now we realize brands are much smaller than that and less important. I think we also realize that without salience, without an existence in the mental awareness of the consumer, nothing else can take place. And I think if you had to put a completely bullshit number on it, most brand managers in B2B and B2C who are well trained would now acknowledge that achieving salience, that getting the brand to come to mind first in buying situations is probably 75, 80% of the job. Not just a gateway variable, but actually the main challenge that they must first of all achieve and then maintain, because as we know, salience fades. In a nutshell, if you look at what we've learned over these last 30 years, when we all learned brand management in the late 80s, 90s, there was this idea that awareness was the gateway variable. It was the bouncer. It was the doorman, right? It was 15%. If I could get past him, I could then form a relationship with my customer and we could become lovers, lots of brand love going on, lots of loyalty, lots of relationships, yeah? Lots of symbolism, all of that would go on Once I was aware, I could build this relationship. I think that concept is widely now derided, even though I think it still operates in the consciousness of a lot of brand managers. I think a better analogy for the way we now think about this relationship is that if you think about the System 1 brain, the generation of salience, it's kind of like the president just having some crazy idea that he's definitely going to do. And then his press secretary, the System 2 more advanced, complex, conscious part of the brain, makes up an entirely bullshit rationalization for what was essentially a completely random, arbitrary slice of the reptile brain. What I'm saying to you is awareness, salience, coming to mind isn't anymore a gateway. It's the house, yeah? And then what happens is once we have that salience, the System 2 process kicks in and provides us with an entirely believable rationale for making the purchase. And in that world, you have to acknowledge that what Brewdog are doing is brilliant. And also, it's not going to cost them anything in terms of, yeah, but you didn't do this, this, or this, because it will be forgotten by the consumer and Brewdog will have moved on to another salient generating approach. It's obviously best to have salience and really clear brand image. Clearly, you can have your cake and eat it. But there are situations, both strategic and tactical, where you have to prioritize and focus. Sometimes it's just not possible to have image and have salience in the same levels. Sometimes salience is its own demanding beast. Yeah. Sometimes you can get 100 points of salience or 5 points of salience and 5 of image, in which case, go for the salience is my point. Prioritize it in your tactical thinking. And then remember to maintain it because salience fades fast. I guess what I'm trying to say to you is Brewdog have got it right. And all these marketers commenting about how, this isn't going to work for them, they're going to get into trouble here, have got it wrong. You need to trade, as you manage a brand, some taste, some class, some style, for the brute achievement of salience and being noticed. And I speak to you as a man that has won the PPA Columnist of the Year award, I think 4 times now, but at the same time, spends a lot of his time writing articles like this, which feature a giant picture of my ass on the front cover of the article. You know, I'm quite crude. I'm not this crude, but I'm professionally crude because I know that salience über alles, yeah? That if we have to trade a little bit of class and style, it should be done. Don't let consistency to your brand image hold you back from being noticed. It's the wrong decision. Brands are not as vulnerable as we've thought in the past. They're not these precious little origami things that can be destroyed. You know that bullshit statement about, brands are built in decades and destroyed in seconds? It's not true. It's something your dad would say, yeah? They're much more robust. And we need to change the way we think about brand management to reflect a more accurate vision of how brands really exist. The great man himself, Les Binet, once said, in his whole career, he's seen some pretty shitty advertising, but he's never seen advertising that's ever damaged the brand itself. And with deference, to Les, it's a bloody long career now, right? We're talking like 80 years, right? And he hasn't seen an example where the advertising's damaged the brand. They're more robust than we think. There's a new article published this month in the Journal of Marketing, fascinating article, which looks at, don't ask me why they choose these categories. One of their examples is buying American football merchandise from, the Cleveland Browns. So in the experiment, they ask a bunch of people who want to buy Cleveland Browns merchandise how likely they would be to buy it if it got a 5-star review. And let's say the purchase intent is 30%. They show another group, the same Browns merchandise, but now with a 1-star review. What do you know? As a result, the purchase intent drops spectacularly. But they then ask that control group to have a look at the person giving the 1-star review. And if the consumer feels like that person giving the 1-star review is very different from them, not the same person as them on one level or another, perhaps they're not really a fan, or they live in a different state, or they're not like them, then although they gave it a 1-star review, the purchase intent of the consumer, of the subject, is actually 27% higher than the person who got a positive review for the same item. So again, I've just picked it because I read it yesterday. I found it fascinating. You see the point here. A 1-star review, but from someone that I deem to be not like me, results in more purchase intention than a 5-star review. Salience, coming to mind. Brands being, less vulnerable than we think. Go, take less risks. I think it's a key lesson. I think Brewdog have it right. The rest of us often have it wrong. Okay, here we are with number 7, TikTokification. I think I made this term up, but I've been in a position before where I've said that, and then some lunatic from Latvia turns up and goes, "No, you didn't. I said it before you in a post to my grandma." So I'm not going to say I made it up, but I certainly was one of the early people describing the process of TikTokification. Let's talk about what it is and why it proves a very interesting thing for the year. So you already know the story about TikTok, right? Every social platform that has reached 1 billion people has done it in a certain period of time. Facebook did it in just under 9 years. Both YouTube and WhatsApp did it in 7 years. Interestingly, Instagram took 7 and a bit years. But our friends at TikTok, 5 years flat. It's fast. It's quick, yeah? Super quick. Now add to that a couple of other things, right? So TikTok's growth means that it has 1 billion users at the start of 2022, but clearly it's not going to stop there. And that trajectory is scaring the bejesus out of the other social media platforms. Where will they get to is the interesting question. Now add to that a second thing. Whichever metric you look at, TikTok has a superior engagement score to all the other social media. So per user, it's now taking far more time away from Instagram or Facebook. It's the most absorbing of all the social media apps. And then add a third marketing factor, it's ad friendliness. You couldn't have invented a better social media tool to drop ads into, because that's literally all it is. Put all those 3 factors together, the growth of users, the incredible engagement scores, and its ability to handle video advertising really well. And it's no surprise that we're expecting over the next 2 or 3 years that TikTok will become a giant advertising monster. Why wouldn't it? And note something important here. 2 things are getting squeezed at this thought, at the presence of TikTok. The first thing getting squeezed is advertising dollars. Social media is a mature business these days, right? They've sucked the life out of news media and TV to as much a degree as they will. And so now they're having to eat their own. There is a limited amount of dollars going to social media, yeah? The presence of TikTok and its growth means it will squeeze other platforms. And then there's that engagement score, right? Again, it's not as if we can keep inventing hours for teenagers to look at screens. At some point, the growth in engagement multiplied the growth in users of TikTok will come at the cost of the other social media platforms. So this isn't just the story of the rise of TikTok. It's the story of its threat to the incumbent social media brands. So what have they done, these giant billion-dollar companies, to defend against this new potent threat? Well, they've all done exactly the same thing, literally. First, they've all said in their various ways, we're going to double down on video, whether video is the source of our attraction or not. Second, but we're going to make those videos shorter, about 60 seconds. And we're going to make them full screen. And finally, we're going to have an algorithm which is going to recommend the next video to watch. Even if we're actually a social media platform that was all about connecting people, fuck that. What we're now going to be is an algorithm-based full-screen short video service. And to prove my point, right, let's play a little game called Spot the Difference. Here, arranged above me, A to E, is TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, and YouTube. Take a moment. Can you identify each one in this era of great distinctiveness? Guess which platform is which from their actual screens. You got it? Let me give you the answers. A is TikTok. C is Instagram. B is Facebook. E is Snapchat. And D is YouTube. You had no idea, right? This might not even be the answer. It doesn't matter. They all look exactly the same. And it's causing some really interesting repercussions. For example, in the case of Instagram, right? Do you remember in the middle of the year when both Kylie and Kim Kardashian essentially provided very accurate brand strategy advice to the buffoons at Instagram, essentially saying to them, for Christ's sake, make Instagram again, right? Stop trying to be TikTok. I just want to see cute photos from my friends. Key points here, photos and friends, not videos from strangers on an algorithm. Things have come to a pretty bad place where Instagram has to derive its brand advice from the Kardashians, and the Kardashians are right, and Instagram actually listened to them and changed things. I have another example. So one of my mates in Australia is a wonderful guy, Mark Wheeler, who runs Google and YouTube down under. He's a brilliant guy, right? And we were doing a thing together earlier this year. And I unintendedly caused him a major moment of heart fluctuation. Because as we were chatting, I was telling him how I was looking at YouTube, and somehow I was asking, how come TikTok are able to pull me off YouTube with an ad and get me onto TikTok? And I'm not even registered with TikTok, but they're able to get me off YouTube and onto TikTok. And he looked at me with the face of a man that had suddenly discovered some fearful, new, massive threat. And it took him about 10 minutes before, and literally you could see his brain was whirling, like, what the hell are these guys doing? Then he realized two things. I'm a digital moron. And second, what I was talking about was YouTube's lookalike product called Reels, which is short form TikTok style video. And I just blundered on my phone from YouTube into their short video and assumed it was TikTok because it looks like TikTok. But you get the point. They all look the same. So what's going on here? Well, I think there's three things going on, and they're three things we've learned from three of the great thinkers of strategy, okay? So I'm a huge fan of Roger Martin. Roger Martin has this brilliant concept that when all the brands in the market do the same thing at the same time to the same competitors, it will result in, and I quote, a commercial bloodbath. And that's exactly what I think is about to happen. Why are we seeing that? Well, then we've got to go back to Gary Hamel and C.K. Prahalad and the concept of core competence, one of the greatest management concepts of all time. Hamel and Prahalad's point is that companies get good at certain stuff. And because they get good at certain stuff, they get shithouse at other stuff. Yeah? What I mean in this case is these social media companies were built on aggression and disruption and growth, which is great. But it doesn't necessarily mean they're great at handling and defending against disruption from others. Because you're a disruptor doesn't mean you're necessarily great at responding to disruption. This is Lucy Bronze. She's one of the greatest football players England have ever had. She's a fantastic right back, and believe it or not, she scores a shitload of goals from the right back position. She's a killer, right? She can just score from anywhere. But if we put her in the goals and try to stop shots, make her the goalkeeper, she'd be useless at it because she's all about scoring goals. She's not about stopping them. You get my point? Just because you're a disruptor doesn't mean you can stop disruption. It's not in your competence set. And finally, that takes us to the great man himself, Clayton Christensen. We use this word disruption a lot in marketing. We never really mention it in its true sense, the way Christensen intended it. And the reality is we're now facing disruption from TikTok because the competence of these brands does not enable them to respond, and it will result in a bloodbath. Well, something weird happened, right? So I wrote a column about this midway through the year. And Roger Martin, who's a hero of mine, who I don't know particularly well, sent me a little message saying that was a great article. And I was really taken with that. So I did something I never do. I reread my column on the topic the next week. And to my horror, I realized I disagreed with myself. Let me explain. So I'd read this situation on the basis that these companies were pretty stupid and they were copying their attacker rather than being more strategic and adept in their response. Yeah. And then what I began to realize, there's a lot more to this than that. They're not that stupid. This is Keith Crack. Yeah. He has great hair. I think he's like 72. He's an ex-Republican congressman or something. If I had hair like that when I'm 72, I'm going to be happy, right? And Crack is now part of a lobbying team who's trying to get TikTok banned. Recently, he said, we should duplicate what we did with Huawei and ZTE. These are companies that have been banned in America, and not let them in. Crack wants to use the same playbook with TikTok. So there's a huge amount of money now being spent on trying to get TikTok banned in the US because of its Chinese connections. And obviously, the lobbying money of the incumbents is a big part of that. And equally obviously, what's going on is the social media companies aren't just replicating their disruptor. What they're really doing is offering their own services because they obviously think or know that TikTok is eventually going to get banned. And when it does, they'll be there waiting, not only to replace TikTok, but to grow a significant amount of the marketplace thanks to this addictive new format. Now, I don't want to go all Scott Galloway on you, but I have a strong, therefore, suspicion that if I was going to start having hot takes and predictions for 2023, which I'm not, I would suggest to you that TikTok being banned in the United States in the middle of next year could be a hot possibility. Number 6, break out the eggnog. Airbnb goes long. This made a lot of headlines during the year, and I think it is a big story because it illustrates bigger topics. So, to be clear, Airbnb pre-2019 was pretty much doing lots and lots of short performance-based stuff. Nothing wrong with that. A shit ton of search advertising, for example, based upon obviously locations and hotels you were looking at. They'd be posting all kinds of invitations for particular destinations using Airbnb. And then what happened in 2019 is the company decided two things. Not to spend as much money on marketing, but with that smaller amount, move a bigger proportion of it across to brand building rather than performance-based stuff. Okay? This is Dave Stevenson, Airbnb's CFO. And he said something very interesting this year, looking back on the last 3 years of this adventure in brand building. He said in 2019, before the pandemic, we shifted our marketing strategy to be more brand-driven and even less dependent on search engine marketing. We made that shift, and it has proven to have been the right shift, not only in 2019, but in 2020 and 2021. The 3 years are important. I'll get to why in a minute, but it's always good when a CFO starts explaining the marketing moves. And let me show you what they've done. So this is the most recent campaign. Keep thinking about that short, targeted campaign using search, and then look at this mass emotional digital video with a little bit of TV campaign that they're now running. I don't think it's particularly good, but it illustrates the format nicely. Here's their current advertising work.
If you ever hear that thunder, put your eye to the sky, boy, and wonder. Maybe there's a kingdom above the weather. Oh, and whether you're gonna get on in is up to him. Carry onward like some songbird, beautiful stranger.
Now, obviously, it's a campaign aimed at a very different objective, but it's also a classic brand campaign. It's tossed out to everyone. It's kind of more emotional, using humor. There's no particular product being sold right now. There's no call to action. It's a classic long campaign. So why do companies invest so much in short, and why don't they follow Airbnb's route and go into brand? Well, if you look at the long and the short of it, the blue and the red, as it were, it's a pretty obvious theory, right? We want the two to work together. We want to build brand, which helps deliver future sales. We want to get current sales with performance that makes us money and also pays for brand, and that wheel starts to turn if we get it in the right combination. But remember, this picture is classically a 2, 3, 4, 5 year picture before we see the proper interaction between long and short. It doesn't happen straight away. Remember too that most companies, your company, most companies are trapped in a 12-month window. We don't see the 3, 4 year picture. Instead, what we see is in the next 12 months, or 6 months, or whatever your short-term window is, the ROI from spending money on performance is always going to be greater than brand building, which is why that 3-year period before Airbnb announced this is really working is so important. It takes a couple of years for the wheels to start turning properly, and that's what Airbnb have now learned. As opposed to other companies that every year just keep over-investing in performance and under-investing in brand over and over again. Groundhog Day in most organizations. With ROI, ironically, the reason why companies aren't making as much money as they could. Yeah? Now, as soon as I say long and short, I get a lot of this, like particularly from senior males, who say, in my day, you could have an ad that built the brand and sold the product at the same time. All this bullshit about separating it out. You're overcomplicating everything, right? It's horseshit. There's all this stuff online now from people like John Long, 6 ways to build your brand with performance marketing, or why everyone should stop approaching brand awareness and performance as though they're totally unrelated activities. No one's saying they're unrelated, John. They're clearly very related. What we're saying is within the same ad, they underperform on average better than creating 2 separate campaigns linked together that deliver a much better result. That's all we're saying. Obviously, a little bit of long will drive short. If you sat watching a cinema ad, some people will go out and buy the product immediately after. And obviously, some short doesn't drive you to buy things. It does sometimes create brand effects. That's great. But there's a strategic point that's being missed here, which is if you can split up the long and the short while uniting them around the same brand and the same campaign and accepting the blurry edges of it, it will always perform better. Here's data from Peter Field demonstrating exactly that point. He calls campaigns or ads that try and build the brand and sell the product at the same time double duty. And they perform. It's not like that's a negative score. It's not like it's 0 on an effectiveness scale from his data. They do work. It's just that they don't work on average as well as breaking it up into the long and the short of it. And that shouldn't surprise marketers who know what they're talking about. It's not just the long and the short. And it's not just 60-40 either. It depends, right? Look at the distance and the difference between these two. They're paradigmatically different, even though they both serve the brand. The long is about going after everyone in the category. The short is about targeting a very particular segment, however you define that segment, for activation. The long is tofu, the short is bofu. The long is about the brand DNA or brand position and codes. The short is about a very specific product position aimed at a particular segment against particular competitors with a particular product benefit. The long is more emotional. The short is more rational. The long builds future brand equity. The short harvests it for sales. The long is going to be the same for 5 or 10 or ideally 15 years. Different creative, but fundamentally the same. This is what my brand's all about. These are my codes. Salience, salience, salience. The short is a series of dozens of overlapping different campaigns aimed at different segments at different times, trying to achieve different goals. The long, it should be measured with brand metrics. The short should be measured with just simple ROI of what we spent versus what we got back. The only thing they really have in common is they should share the same distinctive assets, be coded the same way. So in the long, we can create and reinforce the codes. So in the short, we can bring them up and then instantly get on with the business. So I'm sorry, I still believe in the long and the short of it. The most important word there is still and. We need them both. It's not about one or the other. And we need them both in the right combination. And on that note, a festive long and short note, let us enjoy Coca-Cola's new advertising campaign for this season. You may recognize it. It's the same campaign they've been running for more than a decade. The holidays are coming advertisement is a famous ad. And if I move myself across here and give, the true, wrong one. If I move myself across here and give the, still the wrong one, give the true credit here to the wonderful analysts at System 1, they'll tell you that this campaign has consistently beaten all their other Coke campaigns for years. And so finally Coke, quite correctly, have said, you know what? We're not going to bother with this anymore. Let's just use our old campaign. There isn't any wear out on it. Let's just keep using it each year. Customers love it. And it's true. Something like 4 out of 5 new campaigns aren't as successful as the ones that they replaced. And Coke have got a classic here that they're going to keep, which makes perfect sense. But this ad also, I think, exemplifies something else very important about the long and the short. So let's talk a little bit about this ad for a second. So if you look at how System 1 assess ads, they do it in a simple but really brilliant way. They have a star rating, which is how much the campaign is going to drive the long of it, the brand. Next, they have the spike rating, how much it will drive short-term sales, the short of it. And then they have a fluency rating, which is how much it's recognized, attributed, distinctive to the brand. These are the 3 things ultimately that advertising should do in a mixed amount, right? Now, if you take that data and you look at, first of all, an advertising's spike rating, so how likely is it to drive sales in the short term? And then you look at it versus its star rating, its more longer term brand contribution, the long of it. You can chart where that campaign sits, which is right over there in that top right quartile. This campaign happens to be great at building brand. It also happens to be great at driving short-term sales of Coke for Christmas. It's a brilliant result for Coca-Cola, and they deserve congratulations, not just for making the ad, but replaying it again and not trying to create something new. That's a skill many marketers don't have. And because System 1 look at all advertising, in this case in the UK, we can put all the ads on this 2x2 grid, more than 5,000 campaigns. Here they are. When you do that, you see a very interesting story, across the 5,000 campaigns. So if we split them up on this y-axis to the above average short campaign, so these perform better than average at driving short-term sales, and those that are below average at driving short-term sales, we see an interesting picture. Remember, their star rating goes 1, pretty bad, to 5, outstanding. We can observe a very interesting pattern. So look at those campaigns that are above average on the star, on the brand building, over there on the right-hand corner, right? If we look at them, we find that around about 75% of them are also good at driving short-term sales. The long also is good at the short. And only around 20-25% of them are actually bad at the short. Yeah, see my point? If you have a good brand building campaign, the chances are it's probably going to do short-term sales as well. So we can make that conclusion. Doing the long well delivers on the short as well. A good brand campaign drives immediate sales too. That's why this Coke campaign is brilliant, because it's going to sell a shitload of Coke for Christmas and also build the Coke brand. Now, is the reverse true? If we do the short well, will it deliver on the long as well? Well, we can ask the same question. If it does, we would find that the good short campaigns are also the campaigns over in the 4 or 5 category for brand building. But we don't see that. Look at that distribution, and what you learn is actually most of the campaigns that are good on the short are pretty bad at the long. There are a few exceptions, like the Coke campaign, but they're just that, they're exceptions. Most short work doesn't do much for the brand. If I do some form of promotion on a particular Coca-Cola product, it doesn't do any harm to the brand, but it's not going to build brand either. So we must conclude, therefore, that doing the short well will not necessarily deliver on brand most of the time. And I think that's a key lesson, First of all, it's not the 60-40 rule. It could be anything from 90 to 10 either way. So let's get rid of that silliness, It's very relative and based on all kinds of factors. And it's not brand versus performance. Why do marketers keep banging on about this? No one's saying it's versus. It's all about and. It's about combination and synergy. The most important word is and. But we should accept that despite the fact that these are two linked things, they are different paradigms connected by the brand and by their campaigns, but they're very different demands. And this new nuance from System 1 suggests that a good long campaign will give you some short. But good short campaigns, which are absolutely essential for driving sales for a particular product at a particular time, might be essential, but they need that long supplement to enable a more nuanced long-term success path. And remember, don't get sucked into this, because again, yes, shorts will deliver incredible ROI if you're successful, but avoid getting sucked into it to the point where you don't have that long-term brand building, which will grow things even greater. And again, back to Airbnb. Brian Chesky, the CEO, said something interesting last week. He said, we think of performance marketing more as a way to laser in to balance supply and demand rather than a way to just purchase a large amount of customers. What he's saying is we're using short tactically to sell product when we need to sell product to a particular segment at a particular time, exactly the right way. But Airbnb have also recognized the need to supplement that with proper brand building campaigns as well. And I think, therefore, they illustrate best practice. An interesting one now, extrapolation errors. I find this one fascinating. So I'm old now, I'm 50 odd now, and being 50 odd has many disadvantages. But one of the advantages is you not only can see what's going to happen because you've seen it before, but if you really want to, you can kind of get out ahead of it. Do you know what I mean? And actually do something about it. So when coronavirus came along, I knew what the marketing community or parts of it would do. They would get incredibly petrified, and they'd suggest that everything was going to change forever, and it would turn into an apocalypse of hyperbole. So when I did my talks very early on, March, April of 2020, one of the things I talked about is beware people who are going to tell you everything's going to change. It's going to change for a while, but then it's going to snap back to the mean. Yeah, and sure enough, as predicted, people like Martin Lindstrom turned up. So Martin Lindstrom is a notable brand expert from the United States. He's written a lot of books, way more than Tolstoy. That's how clever he is. And as a result, he was, in the vanguard of people during the coronavirus situation, telling everyone that things were in desperate shape, and that you should buy his book, Biology for a Coronavirus World, to understand how everything was going to change and change dramatically. And I was, I was pretty, critical of that approach. I wrote an article where I accused him of talking utter bollocks. I apologize for calling him a catastrophe monkey. I think that was a bit over the top. I also pointed out that many marketers are obsessed with the pornography of change, and Lindstrom was probably the Larry Flint of the pornography of change. It's a little strong in retrospect, and I apologize to Martin for being a little too pointy. But the stuff he was saying was so nonsensical, it was pretty bad, right? For example, these are actual quotes from the time. This change, coronavirus, is so profound that one can talk about a global synchronization of human behavior, establishing a completely new universal change of consumer patterns. And I don't know about you, but if you're out on the streets this morning, I think you'll have discovered that the global synchronization of human behavior and the completely new universal change hasn't actually happened at all. And it got worse. He also said when it comes to malls, stores, shopping, and entertainment, coronavirus can be counted on to escalate the replacement of conventional brick and mortar models with digital. Old industries will collapse as the space they dominate is completely redefined. Again, total pornography of change nonsense. So let me explain why I think it's nonsense. And again, I'm going to move myself out of the action so you can see. I'm going to put myself right over here if that's okay with you. So I've just picked a couple of charts. I got loads more charts on this, but I don't want to bore the hell out of you too much. This one here is US data on internet sales as a proportion of total retail sales. Yeah, and obviously it's been going up since the turn of the century. Now, if we look at what happens as we get to 2020, let's put in the red zone of coronavirus when it really got difficult for a while. And obviously what we're going to see is we follow the proportion of e-commerce sales, we're going to see a massive spike. Now, if you're Martin Lindstrom, you're going to see that massive spike as proof that we're going into a massive, change of human patterns, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to suggest that none of us could leave our houses for about 7 or 8 months. And so we did a lot more ordering online. And I'm also going to suggest, or I did suggest before this even happened, that we would revert back to that mean. That doesn't mean that we're going to go back to what it was like in 2019. It means we'll revert back to the patterns and trends that were already in place. So, yeah, if you want to believe in the pornography of change, you're going to take that baseline from around about 2020 and you're going to extrapolate yourself all the way up to Uranus. But if you have a little bit more calmness and you understand how change does and doesn't happen, what you're going to do is you're going to expect this to revert back to the mean when coronavirus, like most things, actually comes to an end. And sure enough, if you now look at the data, that's exactly what has happened. I call it the boring brown line of continuity. And it's boring because, unlike Martin Lindstrom, I can't sell you a book. What would I call it? I can't, he's got biology. Look, everything's going to fucking change in the era of coronavirus. What would I call my book? Things are pretty much going back to normal again. It doesn't sell. There's no money to be made from it. You see what I mean? And therefore, the voices that say, you know what, it ain't going to be that different, are the ones no one listens to. Partly because we love pornography of change, and partly because there's no commercial incentive to make that point against all of those trying to sell you on change, the pornography of change, and their guidebook to take you through that path. Just one more chart, indulge me. Another good example, UK cinema. The blue bar is box office, the red line is admissions, they're the same thing. Again, what we see, no surprise, is as we go through 2020 and we run into coronavirus, boom, attendances disappear, and so do new movies, right? Once again, if we're going to use that as an extrapolation base, then the cinema is over. We'll never go to the cinema again. But if we have a bit more nuance, and if we look back at history and accept that things will balance out, what we might see, and what we are seeing in 2022, is that cinema attendances are back on the rise again. This is only up until September. And remember, we don't have that many movies yet. Only Tom Cruise was making movies during coronavirus, so we expect it to be a bit lower for another year or so. But the cinema will come back to approximately the level it was at before, which was slightly in decline anyway. Coronavirus won't kill it off. And the boring brown line of continuity will work again. Now, why am I saying all this to you? I'm saying all this to you because if you remember the episode with Netflix, what was interesting is this was a massive crisis at the start of the year for Netflix because they essentially projected 2 million more subscribers and then ended up during the quarter losing 200,000. So they were, 2.5 million subscribers off what they'd expected to do. And that caused, a gigantic shockwave because Netflix was meant to be growing. They didn't know what they were doing. In that January to March of this year period, there was a lot of questions about their stock. I would argue, and I know this is very simple, and I'm sure there are far more complex explanations, that if you look at the pornography of change projection off that bump they got during coronavirus, where everyone was locked up and therefore had to get whatever they could get their hands on in terms of Netflix and other services, then you ended up projecting a much greater number for the quarters that followed. But if you followed the boring brown line of continuity and you weren't greedy about this and you weren't naive about it, you would have realized that some of those people during coronavirus who took up Netflix would not take it up anymore. And it certainly wasn't a base that you could extrapolate off. And sure enough, there's about a 2.5, 3 million person difference between those two lines, which I think explains exactly where the subscription gap came from, and also explains why now Netflix apparently is back on an even keel and growing at the right rate. I think we made the Lindstrom error in many companies, not just Netflix, Facebook as well, because we got greedy and we got naive and we forgot the reversion to the mean. Okay, Patagonia sells out had to be in our top 10, and it's relatively high on the list because I think it illustrates a key point about brand purpose. Let's get into it. So, this is the delightfully grumpy Yvonne Chouinard, who's a famous Franco-American climber, diver, naturalist, etc. And of course, as you're probably aware, famously this year, he announced instead of going public, you could say we're going purpose, and basically announced that they were going to give up the Patagonia business, sell it off to a trust structure that would ensure the company was held in a not-for-profit arrangement where all profits that were generated would go back to ecological causes. And effectively, he would give up a business worth at least him and his family would give up a business worth at least $3 billion. And the kicker, have to pay tax on that gift as well. Truly, it cost him something. So, an enormous loss, you could say. Now, here I want to use Bill Bernbach. And Bill Bernbach, one of the great advertising thinkers of all time, has many great quotes. But this is the one that we often forget is attributed to him. A principle isn't a principle until it costs you something. And I think we can take Bernbach's quote, which is half a century old, and apply it directly to our beloved topic of brand purpose. A brand purpose is not a purpose until it costs you something. And as Srinath demonstrates beautifully, in his case, it cost him everything, literally the whole value of the company, in order to serve the bigger purpose that was always the guiding direction of his leadership. Now let's contrast that with our ridiculous, oversimplified, fucked up vision of brand purpose that no one challenges. Let's be clear, okay? Let's be really clear. We are so naive and so lacking in depth. We actually believe that, hey, you can have a brand purpose that doesn't cost you anything, right? Irrespective of what Bernbach and other examples might suggest, brand purpose doesn't have to cost you anything. In fact, there's more. You can have brand purpose that will make you money. That's right, make you money. So brand purpose doesn't have to be a loss or a cost or anything. It actually can be a money-making scheme. This is stupidity of the highest order. And let's not forget Unilever, a fine company, just making an ass of itself over this claim, right? Not just because the causality of saying our fastest growing brands have purpose, yeah? It's not as if you didn't, create purpose for your fastest growing brands. Never mind that point. The whole notion that we can have purpose which grows brands faster, makes them more profitable, makes them generate more revenue, runs directly against the concept of brand purpose. The reason you have purpose, like Srinath as an example, is because you believe in something, and that belief will necessarily involve sacrifice and costs. And let's remember while we're at it, right? It's going to cost you in marketing terms probably as well. This is the great work done by Peter Field, which has certainly created a big debate over the last 12 months. Remember, Field went out and looked at a range of non-purpose and purpose campaigns, and he did certain things with the data. But let's just look at the basic data, right? You see here the purpose cases in green, yeah, and how well they are at driving large business effects. You'll see about half of them, or almost half of them, are weak. 40% of them are effective, and 16% of them do achieve some form of stellar impact, which is the one we always try and go for. But when you contrast it with non-purpose cases, what you discover, unfortunately, is that in many cases, those stellar case studies actually perform much better. And on average, if you look across these things, brand purpose cases have on average a lesser impact for large business effects than non-purpose cases. My point here isn't to say brand purpose stupid, don't do it. My point is to say this argument we've had for 5 years, which is, if you don't have brand purpose, you'll fail. Well, that's not true. And second, this argument that says brand purpose is necessary and aligned with growth, it doesn't need to be true. And Peter did say that in his presentation, right? The reason you adopt a purpose approach isn't necessary to have large business effects because it's purpose. It's bigger than that. And I think we've completely missed that point. During Black Friday, Patagonia's point is please don't buy anything on Black Friday. And if you do, we'll donate everything to charity. Brand purpose should cost you. Yeah. I think of all the things I've written this year, this is the most important thing. The purpose of purpose is purpose, yeah? And it's going to cost you, and that's okay, because we're doing it because we believe in a broader, bigger purpose than just generating sales and profitability. And by the way, let's be clear, Purpose is and can be an effective brand strategy. But at the same time, any strategy is a choice. Let's not have this broad brush nonsense where if you don't follow purpose, it will fail. The brands we haven't applied purpose to are doing less good. A strategy needs to be choiceful. We need to make it the right fit for the right brand and the right market. Sometimes purpose does make sense and sometimes it doesn't. But remember, unlike other strategies, if it's a proper purpose, it's probably going to cost you things. And that's okay, because that's why we're doing it. Ooh, we're getting close to the end now. And linked to that topic of brand purpose, we've got to look at Unilever's repositioning of their approach to brand purpose. It's a very big and important moment. So I wrote about this at the time. So I was sitting on a plane. I forget where I was flying to now. It was back in, let me read that date again, 2018, right? And I can remember reading, I'm used to reading nonsense about brand purpose on LinkedIn. It's kind of like a third of the stuff, right? But I remember reading it, and I actually spilled my gin and tonic into my lap, because then having read the nonsense, so the nonsense stuff was, it was high on the quotient scale. But then realizing that the person who'd written the article wasn't some, random marketer from California. It was Hanneke Faber, who's probably one of the most famous legendary marketers in consumer goods. At the time, she was running Unilever Europe. Thousands of brand managers reporting to her, a brilliant marketer, and yet here she was saying some astonishing things. These are direct quotes, right? In the article, she said, purpose comes first today, more important than anything else. She said, the days of managing brands are behind us. And I was like, but surely you have about 1,500 people with the title brand manager reporting to you. The role of brand manager becomes brand activist. Like, what? What does that mean, right? And finally, she ended the column quite emotionally saying, my father would now be proud of me because we've introduced purpose. And it may, and I don't want to be personal about her father or her relationship, but my point was, at what point did we stop having parental pride at making good products, employing people, satisfying customers, turning the wheel of capitalism in a respectful and responsible way? At what point did that become something that wasn't a source of pride? It disturbed me quite a lot. Now, let's be very clear before I really get stuck into this. Both Faber is a brilliant marketer and Unilever are a genuine company. I mean, they're not faking this, right? So you can accuse them of a lot of things, but by God, they're sincere, right? And they deserve credit for that. But there are several things that have driven me crazy in the last couple of years about purpose. One of them is this implication, pretty much promoted by people selling purpose books and courses, that without purpose, a company will fail. That's just simply not true. I also really reject the dodgy causality that purpose brands grow faster or everybody wants purpose. Sure, you can pull out a survey that says 75% of teenagers think purpose is important in buying clothes. It just doesn't tally with them nipping on down to buy fast fashion that they don't need, that's an environmental disaster, that's made by people that aren't paid a living wage. So we've been very ropey with the data to justify our purpose agenda. And with Unilever in mind in particular, it also was apparent that the rules of brand architecture hadn't changed. And of all the things I was surprised about Unilever, the big one was they kind of lost the plot on brand architecture, and they know more about it than most people. So Unilever's got a token endorsement, right? It's pretty much a house of brands, but they have the Unilever logo on the back of all their products. But those products play very different games. And I thought Unilever knew that. The idea of introducing purpose carte blanche across the whole portfolio simply runs against the basic rules of brand management. Sure, brand purpose works great for Ben & Jerry's, for Dove. These are wonderful case studies of massive success, of purpose absolutely working. But by the same token, anyone that's out there trying to find the brand purpose for Pot Noodle or Hellmann's or Magnum ice creams needs their head examined, yeah? This isn't that difficult, and it stunned me that Unilever didn't get that point. and that they would go to market with advertising that essentially positioned Hellmann's on the basis that it reduces the food mountain. My point is, if you talk about Elsie Smith in Rochdale, who's worried about a $3,500 fuel bill and her son being out of work, and you try and sell her Hellmann's mayonnaise on the basis that over Christmas it will reduce the food mountain, you're off your chops, right? It's not going to work. It's simply not going to work. And it spawned, I think, one of the great quotes of the year. Terry Smith's a bruiser, right? He runs a very successful, huge investment fund that he manages himself. He's got a very extreme exposure to Unilever, and he was pretty pissed off that Unilever, A, wasn't performing, and B, seemed to be spending most of its time talking about purpose. And it spawned the great quote of 2022. A company which feels it has to define the purpose of Hellmann's mayonnaise has, in our view, clearly lost the plot. The Hellmann's brand has existed since 1913, so we would guess that by now, consumers have figured out its purpose. Spoiler alert, salads and sandwiches. It's brutal, but it made a point, and it made an impact, I think, on Unilever itself. Now remember, there's an extra point here. We now have all of this data, no surprise, showing us that, this is Kantar data, that consumers are rapidly adjusting what they buy, how much they spend. You know, in the 10 years of relative good times since the GFC, you could get away with indulgences like bullshit brand purpose. Not anymore. We need to have the foreground being value, performance, product. And purpose may still play a role, it may not. But it's a radically different market context that we go into now than we've had for the last few years. And of course, the proof's been in the share price pudding. If you look at that dark blue Unilever line, and we index everyone from the start of 2021, all of the major FMCG brands, Unilever's had a horrible time of it. Purpose isn't working in the market or for the financial investors either. And of course, it's cost the head of Alain Jope, the CEO, who has had his tenure and was certainly the big purpose sponsor. But it's certainly a period that has come to an end. And what we're now seeing are all the great and the good marketers who were promoting brand purpose with great effort no more than 2 or 3 years ago, now quickly backtracking as the economic environment changes and also our understanding of purpose advances beyond the kindergarten level. Mark Pritchard's the most famous and most important marketer in the world. He's brilliant, but he's also made, with Gillette, for example, some incredible boo-boos with his brand for an over-purpose agenda. At Cannes this year, he announced that the industry in general has gone too far into the good and potentially not paying enough attention to the growth. And he brought in this statement, this mission that said P&G will be a force for good and also a force for growth. He famously announced he was now reversing that causality, and the primary thing was we'd be a force for growth, please notice, and then a force for good. And even Faber herself has been, along with Jope and the rest of the team at Unilever, has been clearly over the last quarter signaling to anyone they could that purpose is not the big deal it once was. She said recently, but purpose is the icing on the cake. It's not the cake itself. So I think this is a big moment. I think we are getting more realistic. I think we're getting more advanced. We're getting more nuanced about the concept of purpose. That doesn't mean it doesn't have a role. That doesn't mean it doesn't work. It just means that we're now at a high school level of awareness of it rather than a kindergarten level, and there's still more to be understood. So the Russian brand exodus, I think, is, having spent the last section talking about the failings of brand purpose, let's also give it a bit of credit as well. So we've had this, horrendous attack on the people of Estonia. Let's remind ourselves they've done nothing except live in their country. And this despot, Putin, has committed atrocities of enormous scale and terror for no apparent reason other than he wants to. It's a taste of a medieval brutality that we once thought was long gone. And again, it's easy for us to forget this, right? Ursula von der Leyen, I think is very good, by the way, has led with great vigor and certainty this year and has not minced about, right? The way the EU has led the charge here is, okay, not perfect, but it's pretty impressive. We stand by Ukraine, she said last week, and we will make Russia pay for its cruelty. I think she's been an astonishing leader in a time that we needed leadership, and a lot of people were trying to let Russia off the hook. We can't let Russia off the hook either. Everyone got very, very angry about this at the start of the year. None of us must forget in our industry what a despicable situation this is and how much we have to help the people of the Ukraine. They've got another horrible year ahead of them. Do anything you can to help. And on that note, it was quite astonishing to observe just how many brands, the 1,000 plus big brands, pulled out of Russia, the speed with which they did it, and also the impact it had. This is an example. You want to look at purpose costing you something? This is where you need to look. I mean, I have 3 or 4 clients in this list, and I know firsthand how much it cost them, yeah? The 8, 9, 10-figure numbers that it cost them to pull out of Russia just for this year alone. And the impact it's having on their accounting and finances is spectacular. So we have to give credit, first of all, to every CMO, CEO, marketing director that was brave enough, and some of them took a little bit of time, but I don't care, they did the right thing, to pull out of Russia. And it's really important because, unfortunately, the Russian people live in an environment where the media that they consume can often give them a false idea of what's taking place. I've spent many times in Moscow. They love their shopping more than any European country. And seeing all those brands withdraw in the period of 6 weeks, not to come back, would have sent a message that they could not have mistaken. And then a day-to-day existence without these wonderful brands, again, Russians love their brands like most of us, sends a clear message that Putin cannot disguise. A word here as well about the Yale School of Management. Yale created, we give business schools, an enormous amount of grief. But Kenwin Charles, the dean at the Yale School of Management, and his team deserve an enormous amount of credit. Instantly this began, Yale started an incredible database which pointed to every company and their activities in Russia, and also those that were still trading there. And it became an invaluable tool just to be clear who was and wasn't doing business in Russia, and was a huge part of the pressure that was placed on the brands that remained. I think Yale, it was a spectacular thing for their School of Management to do. And before we move on, therefore, we should spend a moment talking about the shitheads who are still doing business in Russia, which now, given most brands are not, is a sure-wise signal that they support Putin and they support the Russian aggression against the Ukrainian people. If you're planning a drink in TGI Fridays this year, I suggest you don't change your booking and you just don't go. Sbarro's Pizza sucks. Don't fly with Etihad, fly with anyone else. Carl's Jr., no one was eating there anywhere. Alibaba. And my own problem is Lacoste. I have like 50 Lacoste shirts. I wear them all the time, and they've sat in my closet all year. I can't quite face giving them away yet, but I'll sure as shit not wear them ever again unless they do something dramatic to fix the situation. A disgrace. But it's also created an interesting branding situation. So the brands, these wonderful brands, look at McDonald's and McDonald's is a huge brand in Russia. Pulling out of Russia was just a gigantic statement and a huge impact, and great credit to the McDonald's team. But, it left these McDonald's venues empty. And I think it was a speaker at the Russian parliament said, we don't need McDonald's, we can have a Vanya burger. And so almost immediately afterwards, they created Vanya Burger, and it looks a lot like McDonald's, of course, and now it's, a fast food chain in Russia. When IKEA left, it was replaced by a new brand in Russia that I don't know where they got the idea from for that size and shape. Starbucks left Russia to their credit and was replaced with, of course, Starducks. But my favorite is KFC. Again, the great people at KFC were never going to stay in Russia. It's cost them billions. And when they left, KFC was replaced by CFC, Crimean fried chicken. I've no idea how it tastes. the point is normally you can't get away with this shit, right? You can't copy brands. But Russia is a failed state and completely separate from reality now. So this is the official sanction that says, yeah, the Russian Federation says you can have this brand logo because they're essentially in a separate lawless place now. And all of these brands have got approval. And it creates a problem should we ever achieve some kind of peace with Russia, that what will happen to these brands is a fascinating question. And there is one little fillet too. We know from other consumer research that having these lookalike brands remind the Russian people of the real deal is actually more painful for them and causes them more distress than if they just disappeared completely. I like that. And I like the idea that the more we can remind the Russians of what they're doing, the better. Well, I'd like to say on a more cheerful note, here we go with number one, but it's hardly cheerful. There is a cloud, as we'll see. There is a giant cloud. There is a little silver lining. But let's talk, first of all, about stagflation and why it has to be the theme of this year and, unfortunately, probably the theme of next year too. So this is Ian McLeod. Ian McLeod's a long-gone Conservative MP who, during the 1970s in the UK, invented the term stagflation. So stagflation happens when two countervailing forces occur at the same time. You have a recession, a decline in growth, or certainly a flattening of growth. And at the same time, though, you have an increase in cost of living and ultimately in prices as well. So you have stagnation and inflation, you have stagflation. Now that's important because what it means for marketers is two linked but separate challenges. Inflation will demand of you the ability to increase prices. Recession will demand of you the challenge of maintaining ad spend. Let's talk about both. So, to understand maintaining ad spend, you have to understand one of the most important concepts in marketing, which is excess share of voice. First discovered in 1990 by J.P. Jones, extended by Field and Burnett. It's one of the few proper law-like principles. And many people say now, well, does it really still work? Yes, it does. There's some interesting discussions about challenges to it, predominantly because people are spending too much on performance marketing that doesn't work. But it's still a great concept which holds a ton of water. So what we know is if you look at any category and you look at the relationship between share of voice and market share, as a proportion of the total in any particular category, what you observe is essentially an equilibrium. You observe an almost one-to-one relationship between the two. And when we refer to excess share of voice, all we're saying is when we subtract share of voice on the y-axis from market share on the x-axis, there is sometimes an excess number. So, for example, let's take a brand. Typically, when a brand has 10% share of voice, it equates to about a 10% share of market. But if a brand gets ambitious, if it wants to grow, if it's being run by someone that understands what they're doing, they might take that excess share of voice and actually turn it into a positive number. So they might, let's say in this case, double their advertising spend. Let's assume the competition doesn't respond. Well, what happens is you've got yourself now an excess share of voice of plus 10, because 20 minus 10 is 10. Trust me. What's important about that is over time, depending on your category, at a rate of 1, 2, 4% a year, if you maintain that excess share of voice, you will grow your share. And the equilibrium will eventually triumph. You'll grow. The reverse is also true, by the way. You work for a big brand with 20% market share that has about 20% share of voice. You decide to cut the money, save some short-term cash. Well, now you've got a negative excess share of voice of minus 10 because 10 minus 20 is minus 10. And again, the equilibrium will eventually restore itself and you will gradually lose share, all things being equal. Why am I telling you this, given that we're talking about a recession? Well, excess share of voice is at the heart of understanding the recessionary impact. So in recessions, what happens and what's already happening is that, let's say you're a brand and you maintain, and you're spending $50 million a year on advertising. And let's say you maintain that spend, okay? But the rest of your category, as they often could do in a recession, will cut 50% of their ad spend. Well, now, suddenly, you still have a relative excess share of voice. Not because you're spending more, but because everyone else is spending less. You have an excess share of voice of plus 10. The same rules apply. So you see the point. Excess share of voice plays out in a recession because your competition pulls back and hopefully you don't. And the kicker, because the competition is spending less and because media has inventory, your remaining budget will buy you more bucks and more impact, because essentially a dollar goes a lot farther when there's less people buying that media. You'll get more bang for your buck. And that's been the story since the history of recessionary marketing. We've been studying this for 100 years. We see the same thing time over time. Roland Vale in the 1920 recession observed brands that maintained their spend or increased it during the recession did a little bit better in the recession, did a lot better when the recession inevitably ended and the green shoots of growth began again. The same was true during the Jimmy Carter recession of 74-75. The brands that maintained or did not cut their ad spend enjoyed spectacular growth once that recession ended and growth began again. The same was true in 1990 and 91. The brands, again, that survived that recession and maintained ad spend boomed their way out. And it was also the same in the GFC. This is B2B data from Peter Field. Any brand that had more than 8% in terms of excess share of voice during that recessionary period then enjoyed 4.5% annual market share growth in the subsequent years that followed. So you see what's happening, yeah? By maintaining spend in a recession, you will grow your sales. Ironically, not because of the recession, not because of customers, but because your competitors are pulling back, giving you a relative advantage, enabling you to grow your brand and then enjoy that growth as the recession ends. A word here. Lots of commentators, it does annoy me a little bit. Lots of commentators, it's not quite that simple, yeah? So it depends what market you're in and depends what's going on, and this is the nature of marketing in the 2020s that we're in. Nothing can be simple or straightforward. We must add unnecessary nuance, right? So the points being made are, if you're in an industry like restaurants, where things are going to be bad anyway, you need to cut back. I agree, but you need to cut back your short-term performance marketing, not your long-term brand spend, if you can possibly avoid it, right? And other people say, well, but if a business is going to go bankrupt, it can't spend more money on advertising. Well, yeah, that's the case too. You're going to have to end up struggling because of that. The simple point, forget about the nuance for a minute, is try to defend and maintain as much of your ad spend as you can during the recessionary period, because it will benefit your company down the track, and use the historical data to make the case inside your organization. Now, there's a second challenge, as we said, with stagflation, right? Not only do you have to maintain your ad budgets, your other challenge is going to be raising prices. Let's talk a little bit about that. So, there's a school, there's a system, there's research from marketing people on how to increase price painlessly or relatively painlessly. And this is what the school and system says. First of all, it says, don't spring a price rise on your customers like ninjas jumping from trees. Yeah, your sales force won't like that. Introduce it and explain it with a lot of notice. Second, call it what it is, a price increase. Don't use a euphemism like a new, innovative opportunity to spend more money with us. Call it what it is, price increase. The data tells us customers respect that more. Explain the reasons for the price increase in consumer terms. Yeah? Give it to them in a way they understand so they can accept it and move on. And don't miss the opportunity, even at the higher price point, to remind them of the value they're still getting in terms of the product or service. So here's how you do it when you've got a good marketer, trained in marketing and pricing, and she knows what she's doing, okay? So this is, as you know, Pret A Manger have an endless coffee offer, which is basically you pay 20 quid a month, and you can have as much coffee as you like in any Pret, except for inflation running at 12% in the UK. 20 quid isn't enough anymore, so Pret had to increase the price to 25 quid, and this is how they did it. So every member of the Endless Coffee Club got this message. Hello, Mark. From the 16th of March, and this came out in late January, the price of your Pret coffee will be increasing to £25 a month. Yeah. Now look at what's going on here, right? First of all, it's all being explained in consumer terms. So brilliantly, Pret have taken the £5 increase and broken it down by £2 and £1, where all that little bit of money is going. Look how they've introduced it with a little bit of notice, 6 weeks of notice. Look how they call it, a price increase, yeah? And finally, look at that final paragraph that goes, yeah, we know it's £25, but it's still amazing value. This is how you do it. Now, obviously in the context of your industry, but this is how you do it. Now, the one call out here is don't take any external pride in increasing prices, even though you've done a great thing. The media hates price increases because they don't understand that we in companies have to do this as much as anyone, right? They think we're just profiteering from poor old consumers who are struggling. The day after Pret announced this, the big story in The Guardian, bunch of bastards putting up the price of coffee when people are struggling. Also, don't forget, you're going to lose some customers as a result of this as well. Here, Carol was having a problem with her Pret coffee and is pretty frank about it, right? She tweets, Pret, I'd been contemplating cancelling my subscription due to the bitter, not nice coffee I've experienced over the past 2 weeks. Well, as predicted, you're raising the price by £5. Well, I'm not paying more for poor coffee, so I'm off, right? Now, remember, first of all, when you increase prices, you do lose customers, so expect a little bit of this. But remember also that social media is not representative of consumers, yeah? It's not even representative of how Carol feels. Maybe the next day she'll have a nicer morning, and probably if I had to bet right now, I'll bet you she's still a member of the Pret Coffee Club. But my point is, expect some negative feedback, yeah? It's going to happen. You have to tough it out. You've already made your decision. Don't be Elon Musk and start alternating and regretting and varying what you might do. Keep the offer clear. So, we reached the end of our Christmas countdown. Here it is for 2022. These are, at least in my scientific methodological opinion, the top 10 moments of the marketing year. Twitter's pricing nonsense teaches you how to do pricing properly. Brands mourning the death of Queen Elizabeth, reminding you that brands are little things. Brewdog and its campaign for empty salience. Not a bad idea, actually a good idea, and demonstrating the point that salience, sometimes empty salience, is not always a bad idea. Number 7, TikTokification, demonstrating the need to strategically be different and also the power of lobbying in the US to potentially change the game. Number 6, Airbnb goes long, proving once again the power of thinking long and short, getting it in the right combination and not underinvesting in the long. Number 5, extrapolation errors. I think we've reached the end, not of the COVID disease, alas, but at least of the belief that COVID was going to change everything. We have to stop extrapolating off short-term bases. 4, Patagonia giving away its business and demonstrating that the purpose of purpose is purpose. 3, Unilever rapidly readjusting its position, demonstrating that the purpose of Unilever is not necessarily purpose anymore. It's still a purposeful organization, but it's definitely retrenching back to a more commercial, mature approach. 2, the exodus of brands from Russia this year, proving that there is a positive side to purpose and that people really do care about the things that matter. And finally, at number 1, the double challenge of stagflation. Marketers having to maintain advertising in tough times, but also increase prices, puts us really on the spot and reminds us that marketers should and could be involved in pricing. So, finally, what did I miss? Were there elements here that you agree with? Are there elements that you think were incorrect? Are there things here that should have been there that aren't here? Why don't you send me a message to mark@literallyidontgiveafuck.com. I won't read the message, but if it makes you feel better about my list being wrong, I encourage you to drop me a line or two giving me your thoughts on the topic. More seriously, every year we've also done a little promotion for the mini MBA courses that I teach, and we will do this again. So, between now and January the 1st, if you post, tweet, or do any form of social comment in which you refer to my top 10, certainly not necessarily in a positive light, though it can be, you could, but you refer to what you think I missed from my list that should have been there, and you include the mba.marketingweek.com tag, we will search for that tag on January the 2nd. We will pick a random punter and give her or him or a member of their team a entirely free scholarship in April to come on the mini MBA in marketing or the mini MBA in brand management as a special Christmas treat. So please post something. Again, you don't have to agree with me. Tell me what you think was missing, and we can have a little bit of a debate and also give someone a place on the mini MBA. So that's it. I started writing this presentation in Australia about a week ago, and I felt ludicrous with all the snow. But this morning in London, it snowed like 6 inches. And as I look out my window, I'm in London now, there's snow everywhere. So it feels entirely appropriate. It leaves for me to wish you all a Merry Marketing Christmas. Stay safe over the holidays. I wish you and yours the very best. And I'll see you in the new year for an exciting 2023. Merry Christmas, everyone. Merry Christmas.